Our show is meant for educational purposes only and does not replace the advice or counsel of your personal care providers. If you or someone you know is in a mental health crisis, please call or text 988.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Unpacking Mormonism and Other Religious Trauma. I'm your host today, Mason Westbrook, and as you can see by the fact that nobody's next to me on either side, I'm hosting by myself today. So we'll see if we can crash and burn or do something good. So just want to welcome you all. Today we're going to talk about faith and how faith can lead to great things and bad things. And here to my right on my screen is Ian. Ian, we've been on the show a couple of times. Why don't you take a couple of minutes to just kind of tell us a little bit about you and why the hell we should listen to anything you have to say?
Well, I don't know why you would listen to anything I would say, honestly. The one big thing I guess I have a world of experience. I spent 22 years in the military. I deployed to multiple nations. I did some of the most advanced training that you could probably do in the intelligence field. I was counterintelligence. I don't have any of the big bachelor's degrees or any of the master's degrees or anything like that, although I am working on currently getting my finishing my history degree and CJ degree. And so
nice. But
I've got 4 or 5 technical degrees. I'm an avid learner. And I've got this hunger for that. And so I do it by serving on local boards. I actually ran for mayor, but didn't win in local election here in Carthage, North Carolina. And so that's me in essential. I'm married 30 years and I have 4 children, and hopefully I'm going to have grandchildren very soon.
Hopefully so. One of the things that I love about you, Ian, is, of course, you and my wife have always been closer, I think, than you and I have been, just in conversations and things. And you guys can certainly disagree. You certainly do disagree a lot on things. And you two have found a way to be civil about the way that you disagree, to hold opinions, but also change opinions as things go. And I feel like one of the things that you and I also have in common is that we were both presented information that we didn't necessarily know about, or that came, there was more information that came, and it kind of changed our whole outlook on what our history had been. I grew up in the church, and then so too. So to have new information that kind of, in a sense, took that away from me was a huge transition. It was a huge struggle for a little while, and I know in some ways you and I kind of share that a little bit, and I like having that.
Yeah, absolutely. My journey and your journey are very, very similar. Both of our wives kind of walked away from the church for their reasons before we did. It was, and because Jill's family was very much still Mormon, I really held back from actually putting my 2 cents as far as Jill leaving the church. If it's going to be her decision, it's going to be her decision.
Right.
When it came to me actually stepping away, I don't tolerate being lied to very well at all. And especially when the lie is completely and thoroughly unnecessary. Tell me what's really going on. And, it's amazing how well I can deal with it. And so, and right. also, if you're an organization that says that your faith and belief system says one thing, when something comes up that's different, that interferes with that, then you're damn well obligated to stand up and defend my rights to practice them.
Absolutely.
So that was something that was kind of the straw that really broke this camel's back.
Yeah. The lying, one of the big things for me, accountability. if you're lying, and then, for me, it feels like very much the church is, they lie and they only fess up to it when somebody fesses up to it for them.
Yes, absolutely. And that was the thing. If you're busted out about it, oh, okay, we were doing this, but it's not really a big deal because of, whatever reason we want to come at it. And we can beat around the bush all we want, but I'm most specifically talking about the $255 billion in reserve currency that they were trading, doing all kinds of things with that nobody ever heard about. And we were given annual church estimates of, the money that was in that and how it was spent. And it all turned out to be a rockin' bunch of bullshit, So that was really kind of it for me, because just prior to that, a church of $255 billion of ready, available, legal tender that they could have defended us with, they decided absolutely not to, when the federal government, well, actually not federal government, but state governments told us to shut down our services. And that is wrong. We have a First Amendment for a very good reason. And the church actually acknowledges how the men of the first founding of our nation are now sitting with Heavenly Father because of the work they've done on earth. And that's a quote.
Yeah.
So you don't get to have it both ways. You don't let a church of 700 people in California take it all the way to the Supreme Court. You do it. You step the fuck up. And then I'm sorry about my language, but that, like I said, 22 years in the military, and I'm a non-commissioned officer, so I don't color it pretty very often.
Well, we got to have a few F-bombs, otherwise it wouldn't be true to what Unpacking Mormonism is sometimes, right? Because I'm not going to say them, so it's a good thing you're here. So let me talk about.
You've always been very good about that. You've always been quite you're my example of what a gentleman is. You've always been that for me, Mason. So,
well, thank you.
Yeah.
I start to swear a little bit now, but that one's still not mine. So, well, let me talk about why we're here.
Okay.
So, sometimes what will happen for me is I'm perusing Facebook or something. Usually somebody else has posted something that I find intriguing. Not necessarily that I agree with all of it, because it's rare that anybody says anything that I completely agree with. But I saw this video about faith, and it's from Richard Hawkins. And so I posted it. I think I actually even just sent it directly to you. And you're like, what do you want? Or you wanted me to comment on this? And I don't think I even answered, but you started just commenting. And I was like, I really like the way this is playing out. So what I want to do is I want to play this video from Richard Hawkins, and I'll just show it from my phone because of the way that we have to do it here. And then I want for us to just kind of talk about what this means and where we go from there.
Said in a speech famously that I think a case can be made that faith is one of the world's great evils, comparable to the smallpox virus, but harder to eradicate.
I do think that, yes. Because what I'm talking about there is faith, where faith means belief in something without evidence. Because if you believe something without evidence, then that justifies anything. You're no longer vulnerable to somebody coming back at you and saying, hang on a minute, let me argue the case. If you believe it without evidence, which is what faith is, then you don't argue the case. You say, no, I'm not arguing that case. This is my faith. It's mine. It's private. I don't dissent from it. I don't retreat from it. You're just going to have to accept it. Now, that is evil.
So there's the video.
Yeah.
So just tell me what your thoughts are just from the get-go there. Obviously,
from the get-go, I automatically came upon the idea, why is this being made so tribal? You're either in one camp or another. And I didn't like that at all, because when you're talking about fact, you're talking about, the fact of that moment. It's a lot of people place, without making this. Okay, so when you're talking about fact, right, you are talking about, for example, Thomas Jefferson was a slave owner, right? That's a fact, right? But do we say that that was wrong? Because at that time, the gentry of the world, the majority of them had slaves. That was common. That was normal. So being able to extol facts and having a presentistic attitude is not in true. It actually a fact. What you're doing is you're taking and you're taking your morals, values, and experience, and you're superimprinting them upon that individual, and
Right.
that's not right. And one of the other things I did is that really he breaks it into two areas: fact and faith.
Yeah.
And you're like, okay, great. Give me a fact. I mean, if it comes to facts are really stuff that's really incredibly nebulous, because when I think of what exactly a fact is, okay, if I draw a circle and it's almost perfect, it's a circle. Okay, that's what I think. I'm going to go on fact that I made a circle. Well, another person come on, no, it's a little oblong here. That's not a fact. Okay, and that I guess would be my best analogy of what a fact is, because when you're talking about complex issues when you involve science is built on a series of hypotheses that they actually create theory out of.
Right.
It's not fact, because scientists know better than anybody else. Their facts can change.
Sure.
Especially if they're actually pursuing facts. So what
it is more verifiable.
Yes.
Right. So if you're looking at a scientific process, and we'll watch another video here in a minute, where science, you can state as of right now, and I think this is one of the things that you said to me when you responded was, as of right now, this is fact as we know it. But we're also leaving open the possibility that our information will change, and therefore our facts will change. And I think one of the things that he brings up, which is kind of poignant, is that oftentimes with faith, people hold so tightly to faith, there's no room for a change in thought process. There's no room for, well, maybe I wasn't right about this or that kind of thing, because you're attached. It almost feels like your whole person is attached to that idea. And what do I become if I lose that idea? Like for you and me, what do I become if I lose the religious organization that I've known my whole life? What happens to me now? And some people are just either afraid to or unwilling to make that leap. And I understand why, but it's kind of tough. And so, you're dealing with facts that can still change, even though as of right now, they're verifiable information.
Fact and faith share two things that we should always, put a backpack on them. And that backpack is that whatever we have there at that moment of that time is really only good there for that moment and that time.
Sure.
Because facts can change, evidence of faith can change, and if you're of the viewpoint that your evidence, that your faith is predicated on no evidence whatsoever for you, and that evidence can be, hey, it makes me feel good.
If you would like to donate to our show, you can do so through Venmo at Daisy Girl Communications.
You still have to continuously evaluate, hey, is this really what I believe? This is really my faith. Do I really, do I really go down this road of, hey, I'm not going to listen to you, on this subject because of my faith. And I don't know, you've encountered that. I've watched the feedback you get on Facebook from your relatives, and mine, not mine, but Jill's and our friends are very much the same way. I say something that's actually very fact-based, and they just say, you're just playing whack-a-mole. And I'm like, how is that? No, that's not what I'm doing. I'm being lied to here. This is something that I find unacceptable.
Yeah. And it's interesting because actually the whole idea of whack-a-mole comes from a general conference talk. Yeah. And it's very much almost like, and again, you and I are both there, it's almost like all we can do is, oh yeah, that's a great defense. Whack-a-mole, that's all they're doing. And we just puppet the words without doing thinking. So I want to read this. One of the first things that he says, whoever the commentator asks him, he says, "You've been noted as having said, faith is one of the world's greatest evils, comparable to the smallpox virus, but harder to eradicate." And my thought was, and I want your thoughts here too, but as I think about that thing, I think the big difference between like eradicating something like smallpox and eradicating something like faith is that it takes a thinking mind. How did we eradicate smallpox? Somebody figured out where it comes from. Somebody figured out how it spreads. Somebody figured out how to make a vaccine. Somebody figured out and tested these different things. And of course, that costs lives along the way, right? You don't test something like that without also losing people. But it was a thought process. We recognized this is a problem. What do we do about it? Whereas with faith, oftentimes what happens is, this is a problem. Ooh, is this going to interfere with what I believe? Oh yeah, this is going to interfere. I'm not doing that. No. And then that's when it goes on the shelf, or you just ignore it or whatever. So his comparison there, one with smallpox, you take a thought process to overcome a problem. Whereas with faith, you take a thought stopping process and stay where you are. And I think that's why he says it's so hard to eradicate, because people don't take the time to re-examine, like you said, on a regular basis. What now? What about this? What about that?
Right. I like your dual analogy between the difference between faith and fact, is that fact has to be verifiable, quantifiable, and something that you can actually say, hey, here it is. Faith is something that can be nebulous and unknown. And sometimes the two cross over.
Yes.
Where you have a person of faith and a person of fact, and this person of fact says, hey, this is what's happening. And the person of faith says, I don't accept that. I get that. But it doesn't mean to me, and it never will mean to me, is that you eradicate that idea of faith.
Right.
Because you can't, and this is a point I brought up in our original conversation, you can't know everything.
Right.
And that expectation is absurd, because, you're like, okay, a fact, a cold, hard fact would mean if I get in my car and I drive down to Marcus and Christie's, which is through 2 blocks down the street, I'm going to get there. Okay. Right. And the same would be true as I have faith in the fact that if I get in my car and I drive 2 blocks, two houses down, I'm going to still arrive at Marcus and Christie's. I can have faith and fact in those, in across in that.
Yeah, absolutely.
But if I say I'm going to get in my car, I'm going to close my eyes and I'm going to drive to Marcus and Christie's, I may very well run into Marcus and Christie's house. Okay. So
right. It doesn't matter how much faith you have at that point in time. You put in a variable that negates your faith that this will happen. Yeah.
And see, that's what I'm trying to say when it comes to faith. Sorry about that. When it comes to faith, is that if you put in that blind variable, right? Then that is the kind of faith that the person is talking about. That's not my definition of faith whatsoever.
Right.
I think that's why I don't like his idea of making it so tribal.
Yeah, well, and I think the difference there too is that oftentimes, and I think kind of what he's talking about faith almost at the expense of evidence, meaning that there is evidence to demonstrate that your faith is inerrant or errant, but you follow it anyway.
Right.
Not about, like, for instance, God. You can have a faith that God exists, and you have experiences in your life that tell you that that's true, but they're not verifiable. They're not repeatable. You know, you could kneel down and pray one day and feel like you get an answer, but you could kneel down and pray the next day and not get the answer. Or I could kneel down and pray and not get the same answer. It's not repeatable,
Right.
like science is. So I don't think that faith as an idea is the real problem. It's faith that is meant to block out evidence. It is faith that allows for, and this is one of the things that he says. Let's see, what is it? I actually just want to go back to one of the other things that he says. He says, because I kind of want to pick out, when people make comments like this, there's always wording in there that is meant to kind of drive somebody to a specific thought.
Right.
And of course, those can be good things and they can be bad things. One of the things he says here is, because what I'm talking about there is faith, where faith means belief in something without evidence. And that's not necessarily true. Actually, what I would say, if I were to change it, I would say without enough evidence. Right, like, because you can believe in God because of everything that you look around. You're like the way that Alma describes it in the Book of Mormon is like, look around you. Everything denotes that there is a God, and for some people that's true, and for some people it's absolutely not true. But what you have then is you have a faith in God. It's still faith because there's not enough evidence to prove it, but that doesn't mean there's not evidence, at least the way that you see it.
Right.
And so sometimes when I look at these quotes, I kind of have to look at the way that the words are played to make his argument more valid. And faith is not belief in something without evidence. It's faith it's a belief in something without adequate evidence, but not without evidence at all.
Right. If faith can be your knowledge of the Bible.
Sure.
Right. If we're talking about the specific subject of what we believe religiously, your knowledge of the Bible is good enough for you, and you understand that is your world viewpoint of how the Bible says it. That's it. You're good. Right. You're done. Okay. Right. A lot of times that very an unflexible viewpoint of that is what the person is taking issue with, because there is significant evidence that says there's parts of the Bible that are meant as allegories and they're not meant as actual fact. There is significant parts of the Bible that are meant as historical fact that are not meant as allegories, and you have got to go through that thing and really understand it.
Why do you think that people don't? So you're talking about people that will hold on to the Bible as if it's absolute fact. You and I both know people like that. And that doesn't denote they're good or bad people. It just is the way that they are. What is it that you think? And I have my own idea about this, but I want to know what your idea is. What is it that causes them to just hold on to it as fact and not address it almost piecemeal, the way that you're saying? Well, yeah, that sounds like a story that I should be able to just take. I can take some benefit out of it, but I'm not going to, hold on to that as an absolute truth. It just is what it is. What is it that you think causes people to do that?
There can be a lot. The story, when people bring that up, I bring up this story. When we first went into Afghanistan, we had females with us, right? And these are, Afghans are very tribal people. Sure. They're probably a good half century or century behind us as far as technology goes. What was amazing is that they saw pictures and videos of females in uniform doing their job of inspecting cars, inspecting other females, locals, and inspecting men, right? It's their job. They're MPs. That's what they do.
Right.
The tribal leaders were like, you can't have men touching women. You can't have men touching women's belongings. And we would tell them, hey, those are women. They're like, no, they're not. You could not convince them by any measurement whatsoever that was a woman doing that. And that was because their lack of knowledge of really, I don't really know why they did that, but the fact that they didn't, you could clearly see their hips were wider. You could clearly see that they had female parts.
Right.
We actually took up the idea of everybody would be in T-shirts performing that function. That way it was undeniable about who was what and what was who. And because for the most part, soldiers at that time didn't have beards. So they had a real difficult time dealing with us because beards and people in beard that are bearded in their culture were
deserve respect.
Hetero service, and the people that were without beards were homo in service.
Oh, okay.
Right. So I guess you'd say. So that was difficult for them to see around that. And I kind of place that on a bigger analogy of the rest of the world. Sometimes and sometimes it just people are lazy in their belief system. They really don't want to put the effort into actually understanding and acknowledging where it comes from and what the historical context of it is, and where when you take it and you look, okay, this is what Scripture is telling me. Okay, so look at it in an analytical viewpoint or even a spiritual viewpoint about, hey, how does this really apply to my life?
Right.
Jane down the street is having an affair with Bob 2 blocks over. Am I going to go throw a stone at Jane? That's not, no, it's not what we do now. Right. So it's one of those things I hate, and I hate to say my worldview of people for the most part is I think they're lazy.
Yeah.
And I don't like to be negative like that, but man, I've seen people do some really shockingly stupid stuff.
I think you've hit on part of what I was thinking. I was thinking more along the lines of this next piece here, but I love the idea of lazy, and for 2 reasons. One, Russell M. Nelson called people that leave the church lazy learners, right? When in fact, it's generally the members of the church that are the lazy ones, right? Yes. They read their scriptures, even if they're doing the things they're supposed to be doing. They read their scriptures, they have their family home evenings. You could be the perfect Mormon family or any other religion. You could be the perfect Mormon family doing all these things, but it doesn't necessarily imply that there's thought going on. You are sharing with your children or sharing with your spouse or even just with your own head. You're just using all this information to just reaffirm what you already believe. You're trying to take this information and put it in the compartment that says what I believe is true. Almost like the comparison with science is that what science will come up with is almost invariably a hypothesis that something is not true.
Right.
And then verify that it's not true, and then be happy and surprised when what happens is, no, it actually is true, right?
Right.
Whereas religious people in faith typically will look at it as, I believe this is true. Let me do the things to help continuously reaffirm my faith that it's true, rather than looking at it objectively and going, okay, is it true? I think it's true. Let me prove that it's not. In fact, the promise that is so famous in Moroni that says, read these things, ponder them, and then pray about it and ask, famously missed by members. He says, ask if it is not true.
Right.
And some of it's just linguistics, right? He's basically saying, ask that it's true. But it's almost that idea. They almost kind of throw in that negative thing as if that's what you should be asking. And it's just, It's fun. The second thing that I love the whole lazy idea. And I don't think it's because people are choosing to be lazy. I think it's because we become comfortable in what we have and don't feel a need to become uncomfortable. People in general are not hasty to become uncomfortable. There's enough uncomfortable in the world.
Right.
We have to seek it out.
Yes.
So
Yeah. And
go ahead.
yeah, and faith can be like this big warm blanket you just wrap yourself in.
Yes.
And you just, I'm comfortable with this. I don't want to rock my own boat a little bit. I don't want to go, out on a limb ever. I just want to I want to hang on to what my little safe space is here. And and to a certain extent, I guess that's a good way of being, because it keeps you sane. I mean, in a lot of ways, it can keep you very sane. But when you start stepping out and start saying things to people around you that are absurd, and you start making people around you follow the absurdity of it, then that's not okay anymore.
Yeah.
If it, when you were talking about this subject, I was thinking in my head, I was like, you can break this really down into a bunch of different ways. And the way I broke it down mostly is the arguments is faith, fact, instinct, and science. Okay. And that's kind of the functionality of a big chunk of the human brain, is that's what we break it down to. Fact is something that we can absolutely 100% verify. That doesn't mean it's science. Okay, so people equate those two a lot of times. Oh, and like you said, science really lives to disprove. It's not a consensus. It doesn't sit there and say, well, we're all going to come to this decision and this is what it's going to be. Well, that's exactly what faith does. That doesn't make any sense, and a lot of times your faith helps you fill in those gaps of everything else that's going on when between the faith, the fact, the instinct, and the science. Instinct is what keeps you safe. Instinct is what helps you defend yourself. Instinct is what puts food in your gut. And so we have to have that. But if I take my instinct and I apply science to it, right, that my people need more food than everybody else needs, we have the beginnings of World War II.
Yep.
Right? We have the very reason why Israel and Palestine cannot get along. Because I hate them, they're the cause of my hate, and that is the way it is.
Yep.
And if
we can't step back and examine the reasons why.
Yeah.
We can't step back and look at the similarities. We just can't step back. That's the problem.
Yes.
We can't step back and look at it from a different perspective. I cannot put myself in your shoes to see it from your perspective, because that might change how strongly I feel about something. And right now, that strong feeling feels good.
Yes.
I'm holding this passionate thing, and it feels good. So why would I do anything to interrupt that good feeling? Well, as you progress and as you start to interrupt that good feeling, you start to recognize that good feeling comes from lots of different things and is not necessarily a healthy thing.
Yeah.
So you have to step back. The other piece that I think what keeps people in this place of, I'm going to take the Bible or the Book of Mormon or whatever, I'm going to take it at its word. It is God's word, every single piece of it.
Yes.
The first thing is, I think it's just hard to break things down. It takes an awful lot of effort. And so we become lazy, we become complacent, we become comfortable. One of the things I like about your analogy of the blanket is, it can be very comfortable. It can be soothing. It's also restricting. There's so much that you can't do if you're wrapped in a blanket. And one of the things is you can't give a hug. There's so much that you can't do when you're safe in this little spot. Yeah. But because it feels safe, you don't examine what you should do to improve yourself or whatever. But the other one is that we're just afraid. So we're lazy and we're afraid. If I do delve into the Bible, if I do delve into the Book of Mormon, if I do study Joseph Smith, if I do study all these historical things, I'm going to end up in a mess and I'm going to lose my faith and therefore lose my salvation. We're afraid to approach it because it's just safer and easier to stay where we are.
Yeah, and especially when you start looking at history, because you find out that history is not pretty. It's full of gray stuff. It's full of people that you thought were fantastic, and they turn out to be not so great. It turns out to be that you had ideas about, stuff that happened that really didn't happen, and it can be difficult if you're a person of faith and you start studying history, because a lot of that is that you have difficulty understanding am I being presentistic when I look at this stuff? Because, you can't know it all. That's one of the biggest things I have with this, if you have faith and you have fact, if you do deny fact because of your faith, I can deny that fact because of my faith. Well, I've got this idea in my gut somewhere that instinctively I think he's wrong. And I can kind of stand on that until I get more facts and to disprove it.
Trauma Bonded is available anywhere books are sold.
And if you have that kind of Marcus Aurelius look of always looking,
yes,
always be curious.
Right. I'm happy with what I have.
Yes.
But I also recognize there's probably more out there, and I'm going to keep an open mind. So when that comes, I'm able to accept it or reject it, right? Not everything that comes is going to be healthy or better for you, but I do want to be able to take a look at it. I want to take it into consideration. And so
my biggest thing about this whole statement is that and being counterintelligence, I look at this, why would you say something like this?
Mm.
This is more, to me, kind of an inner monologue thing than an outer monologue thing. Because if your object is to go out and just piss a bunch of people off, well, good job, dude. You did it. Well, rock and roll. There's honestly no reason to sit there and discount another people's feelings, rationale, or whatever for no reason whatsoever. So what's his motivation for saying this? And if he thinks he's going to bring world peace because he can discount faith, I got a lot of news for him.
Sure. I personally think that and of course we'll never know, right? Because I haven't, I don't know him very well. I haven't listened to very much of his stuff. This is completely just a little tiny piece of what he said pulled into this conversation. I think it's an attempt to get people to view things from a different perspective.
Yeah.
And sometimes the way to do that is to just directly attack what you hear.
Yeah.
It's to take the baseball bat basically and say, hey, look, wake up, man. And just look, there's another way to see this. One of the reasons I have struggled so much, even with the concept of God, is because of all the bad that goes on in the world. And I think he's trying to demonstrate that some of that comes from this religious faith zealotry, which is, of course, historical fact there. There's a lot of wars and atrocities have happened in the name of faith, but that's not the only reason. It's not the only reason that happens.
Yeah, and I don't know, because he doesn't really go into it. A lot of people make the mistake of saying faith, and you're just talking about religion.
Yes.
Right? And a lot of times it's not it. The Nazis were not motivated by any religious context whatsoever. They were motivated by the idea, their faith that they were better than everybody else.
Right.
And it was everybody else that was keeping them down, especially the Jews, were keeping them down and making their life miserable.
Right.
And we turned out to be it didn't turn out to be. It's absolutely ludicrous to say that and horrible. But how am I trying to say this? It gave them the motivation, the real angst to go out there and do these horrible, horrible things. So as much as you want to categorize faith as being religious, it's not. It can be a lot of different things.
Sure.
So
I think ultimately what tends to happen and allow for those kind of things is that one group figures out a way to dehumanize the other group.
Fact.
Like slavery.
Yeah.
If you can take the idea that the white race is superior to the black race, well, then it's not so big of a deal. It's not, this is going to sound terrible, and I don't believe this at all, but it's the idea that people will treat animals differently because they're animals. They're not humans. So why would I feed my animals off of my plate when they have food right there, kind of a thing? It's that idea. We have the idea as humankind that animals are different. They don't have the same brain capacity that we do. And so if you can somehow sell the idea that another human being is an animal.
Yeah, or they're evil, or they're wrong.
They're evil, or yes, whatever tag you want to put on it that separates you from them and elevates you above them.
Yes.
You can get people to do terrible things. And looking back now, like we can look back now on slavery and the things that happened in the 1800s and so on, and go, how? Or the Holocaust, the things that happened in World War II, or the Inquisition, the Spanish Inquisition, or we can look back and go, holy hell,
wow,
how did people do this? And the answer is, you separated them. You elevated yourself above them. And so that allowed for you to do whatever you want. And this is one of the things he says there. Like he says, because if you believe in something without evidence, then that justifies anything, which is a completely black and white statement. And it isn't true, but you can see how sometimes we make it true. If I make myself better than you, I can start to justify anything that I want to do because I'm more important.
And you'll go as far as cherry pick your evidence. That
absolutely
that makes you rationale why you're doing what you're doing.
Right.
That makes you a better human being than that other human being, and that way I can do terrible things to people.
Right.
Like the church with Joseph Smith.
Like the church did with Joseph Smith.
Sure.
Yeah. So, which they continue to cherry pick information about him all the time.
And they do it because the ends justify the means, which is also a very terrible thing most of the time, is that if the end is more important than how you get there, you'll do whatever you need to do, or whatever you feel like you need to do. You get things like the Spanish Inquisition, like the Mountain Meadows Massacre, right? These are the people that hated us, so we're going to hate them back, and we're going to take care of this problem, or whatever.
Yeah, you get things like MK Ultra. You get things. Do you know what I'm talking about there?
No, I don't.
MK Ultra was a program the CIA had where they fed mass populations LSD.
Okay.
And that's not a conspiracy theory. That's actual fact. All your listeners, you can look that up. That actually happened. They also used white lithium and put it over housing developments. Why? Because they wanted to dig up the facts. They needed to prove what they were trying to prove.
Right.
Because they wanted to dig up the facts with MK Ultra to see how they could program mass populations.
Right.
And the same with white lithium is that how much lithium could we put over these housing developments before we started seeing mass levels of cancer?
Wow.
So yeah, and that's horrible. But that's using that's like using science to prove something.
Right. That's not even a faith, quote unquote, faith thing. Yeah.
And those people's only rationalization is that, oh, we're the government, we get to do this kind of stuff.
We had to know it, right? We had to know if we could use it later.
Yeah, we have a
This
big
would be a
cause.
viable option.
Who gives a shit about those little guys? Who gives a shit about the 14-year-old you gave a bad trip in, and now he looks at a light bulb his entire life, you know? So it's just horrible, you know, the way people treat it. And it's not always faith that people do it. That people do it through a number of rationalization. And if you say, okay, this is all faith, and you have that, and you label it religious faith, right? Well, I don't think you're doing justification to what people actually say is faith and what they say is fact. So you know, I have my reasons why I believe that there is a God, and I can share that with you probably offline, but that's not here or there. But it does not affect my worldview. It's that I question all the time, you know. Again, I go back to the being stoic has helped me with PTSD more than anything else that I've been involved in my life. So having that toolkit there makes me understand that I don't understand everything.
Right.
And I have to really do something uncomfortable almost every day that makes me grow, that makes me challenge, that makes or you know, sets me back.
Right.
You know, I don't like going out and working on my car and being an abject failure at what I just did. You know, it's
right.
You know, I throw tools and get mad, and you know, that's the way it is. But it's all part of that growth. Yes. You know, you're not here to feel good.
Yeah. So there's one last piece of this quote that I wanted to go over, and then if we have time, I'd like to play that other video. But it's this last piece. He says, if you believe without evidence, which is what faith is, then you don't argue the case. And then he says, you say, so talking about the believer says, no, I'm not going to argue that case. This is my faith. It's mine. It's private. I don't dissent from it. I don't retreat from it. You're just going to have to accept it. And then he says, now that's evil. I don't agree with that, but I can see how it can become that way.
Oh, yeah.
Again, I want to call out just kind of this wordplay here. For me, when you say something like, it's private, I don't dissent from it, I don't retreat from it, what you've done is you've demonstrated, because if people are saying this, which I've heard people say this thing, I don't dissent from it, I don't retreat from it, you've created it as a problem to dissent, a problem to retreat, a problem to talk about it, a problem to argue it. And if anything is, if you feel like you can't argue something, and I'm talking about in a healthy setting, I'm not talking about just to argue just for the sake of arguing, but if you feel like you can't argue something in a healthy setting, that feels like a problem to me. You've created something that is untouchable, that may not be what you think it is, or may not be true, or may not be factual, because you're unwilling to talk about it, to argue it, to dissent, to retreat a little bit. You may find that you're holding tightly onto something that doesn't have any true value. And I think that's where the quote unquote evil he's talking about comes from, is that you're holding on to something that is incredibly valuable, but just isn't.
Yeah. When the first part of his statement says it's private, right?
Yes.
Well, clearly, if this is the exchange that's happening, it's no longer private.
Right.
And that you know, deconstructing his sentence. And so that at that point becomes, hey, no, this is not private anymore. Your actions or behavior or language is saying something that disagrees with I believe is fact.
Right.
Okay. And your that warm blanket of faith that you have put around yourself, right? And you're saying is private. Well, I don't dissent and I don't retreat from it means by very definition, it is not private. Okay.
Right.
What you're doing is something that's coming out in public and saying, hey, this is who I am. This is my faith. This is, I believe with people that have the left toe is the largest toe that you've ever seen, or the best people on the planet.
Sure.
No, but it can be absolutely ridiculous or benign, but you're actually, when you take that warm blanket and you're kind of exposing yourself and saying, this is no longer a warm blanket. Here I am. This is what I believe, and stick it up your ass. That's not right. In my opinion, because number one, you're not challenging yourself.
Yeah.
And that's what we're put on this earth, to really kind of look at the world and say, okay, how do I challenge myself? How do I make things around me, in my definition, better?
Right.
It's not right to be this person that actually, I'm going to make your life unpleasant and everyone's around me life unpleasant, because I believe that that's how it should be. I believe that you shouldn't be able to have rose bushes in your front yard. So I'm going to join an HOA, and everybody in that HOA, I'm going to take it over, has to pull up their rose bushes, or I'm going to fine them $1,000. And there's no rationale why.
And the word there that I find the most important is essentially what you're doing is it's imposing. And I think you said this before, is that you're imposing your will on somebody else. There was another video I watched where somebody gets up and asks a question of this guy who's an atheist, and he says, why do you find justification in taking something away from 95% of the people who find it very helpful? He's talking about Christianity, I think in this case. Might have been religion in general, but he was, because I didn't hear that first part, but it was implied that it was some sort of religious connotation. Why do you feel justified in taking something that 95% of the people find healthy and good for them and replace it with what 5% of the people want? And this guy says, well, let me clarify. I never said that. I'm not trying to take that away. Look, if you want to go play with your toys, go play with your toys. You play with whatever toys you want to. And again, talking about religion, you want to invite other people over to your home to play with your toys with you? Fine. I don't have any issues with that. You want to go out and talk to people who want to listen and share your ideas about the toys? I don't have any issues with that. But don't tell me I have to play with your toys.
Yes.
And that's really where it comes in, is that religion has historically done a good job of trying to impose what they believe is true on other people. And I think that's the real issue. I think that's where the evil comes from, is that you move past sharing what you believe to imposing what you believe. And that's a serious line that you've crossed that I don't think is healthy or appropriate.
Right. But can we say the same thing of fact?
I suppose it depends on what kind of facts you're talking about. But I think that even with facts, if your move is to impose the belief that this is in fact fact, then you may be on unsteady ground, because when we start to impose our will on somebody else, whether or not we're right, whether or not we're good, we have stepped into an area that can get very mucky.
Yeah. There's so few things. I mean, Plato made this argument over and over again. There's so few things that are actual fact, that it becomes a matter of what is and what can be proven and what we believe. And it's always, there's that mix. So, he talks about in his writings, the perfect chair. What does the perfect chair look like? And everyone gets a different thing in their head about what a perfect chair is. But what is the perfect chair? And in all honesty, there's no way of saying that.
No, not for more than one person.
Right.
You're going to find your perfect chair. I might have my perfect chair. I guarantee they're not going to be the same.
But if I say this is the perfect chair, you have to like that chair. That's taking fact and very much doing what faith has been guilty of in the past.
Yep.
And you probably rile some of your people up, But the last COVID thing that just came out was a whole bunch of facts that were thrown about that had no proof whatsoever. It wasn't animals. It wasn't that somebody licking bats or whatever. It was actually, this is an engineered virus. We know that. The masking and 6 feet and closing down did nothing that was effective. In fact, a lot of times government got involved and they did absolutely the wrong thing, where they stuck infected people with old people. And then the antivirals came out and people said you can't use antivirals. Even though they do have some success, they're not a cure-all, but they did have some success, but you can't use them. Right. And you're like, okay, well, why? You know? And then they came out with the shot, and it didn't do what they told us to do. And we were told for literal months, it's going to do this, or it's going to, you're not going to be able to infect people. You're not going to get infected. Yeah, it's not what happened. So you can get beat up on fact and faith.
Yeah.
Either way. And I just really hate how this guy makes it very tribal between the two, because he needs to acknowledge where he's coming from and the faults that are involved with where he's coming from, as well as, hey, this is what I'm opposing against. But I think it's like you said before, he's walking up to the cage with a baseball bat and smacking it.
Yep. That's what it feels like to me. Yeah. I think the problem comes in, one of the things that I noted down, I don't remember exactly why, but faith and sometimes science as well, things that we consider more factually based. Oftentimes the trouble comes when we have to force answers. With the whole COVID thing, why are we forcing answers? Well, we're forcing answers because people are dying, but it's even more sinister in the fact that we're forcing things because people's political aspirations are on the line, because people's livelihoods are on the line. And when you take all those things in, we become this, this scared mass of people. I don't know if you remember the original Men in Black with Will Smith and Tommy Lee Jones. When Tommy Lee Jones is trying to convince Will Smith to come on as an agent, he says, why all the secrecy? People are smart. And he says, a person is smart. People are dumb, right? They're hysteric. And that's what we saw, is you have this mass of people, and the reason that they become so hysterical and unreasonable is because they're scared. As a group, they're scared, and they're scared for significantly different reasons. I might be scared because my mom is sick, but that guy over there is scared because you've shut down all the businesses and he's going to lose his livelihood. And that guy over there is scared because he has aspirations to be a senator someday. And if this doesn't get cleared up, they're going to blame him for it and he'll never get there. And this guy's scared for this and that guy's scared for that. And so we're all scared for different reasons, but we're all scared at the same time. And we become hysterical. We become unreasonable. And when you talk about faith or even science, some people are very dedicated to science and they might become scared because this isn't working the way I thought it would. Or, like just to take the example, Fauci is in charge of the CDC, right? And if he doesn't come up with something, people are going to blame him. Well, then he came up with something and people blamed him anyway.
Yeah.
Right. Because it didn't work the way that he wanted. And we can't just say, look, we've developed this vaccine. We believe it's going to help. We hope that you'll take it because we believe it will help. But you need to know that there can be side effects. There might be struggles. There might be worse things that come from the vaccine. We can't just be honest about it. We can't just say we've done the best we can in the short period of time that we've been given to develop something we think will work.
But wouldn't that be great?
Just be honest about it, right? Same thing as like religion and church. Look, we recognize that it would be weird, right? We recognize that you now know that we took tithing funds and we saved them for a rainy day. We did what we thought was best with them, and we've developed an incredible rainy day fund. We should have told you in the beginning that that's what we're going to do. We didn't. We had our reasons. Some of them we still think were good. Some of them probably weren't.
Yeah.
Yes, we did this. We're taking accountability for it. and we're going to discuss how best we could use this money. We're going to be more forthright in the fact that it's there and what we're doing with it, blah, blah, blah. We can't just be honest about it because we're afraid of what the repercussions are. Why do people lie? A lot of times it's because they're afraid of what's going to happen if they tell the truth.
Yeah, fear was a huge motivating factor. Again, it's been historically a factor that we've had manipulated against the common man, us, you and I, over and over again. Calling up the Spanish Inquisition, they're witches. No, they're really not. And stop saying that, please. But nobody said that. Nobody.
Right, you can't be rational in that moment.
Yeah.
You just have to pray. And frankly, leadership preys on the fear sometimes too, right?
It does.
I know that if we do this, we're going to make people afraid, and then we can accomplish what we're trying to accomplish.
Yeah.
So I'm not even going to move on to that other video. I think that we've done a good job of kind of discussing what I wanted to discuss, and I think moving the video. I've learned over the 2 years of doing this podcast that oftentimes I'll try and throw in another piece right at the end, as if just wet your whistle on this one and then we'll talk about it. I've learned that I can't do that. I can't just throw it into the end and then not talk about it. So if you would take a few minutes to just kind of share maybe some closing thoughts about this video that we watched, faith, and kind of the things we've said. If you have anything else you'd like to say, I'd love to hear it, and then I'll make some closing remarks and we'll get the heck out of here.
Yeah, I think my biggest closing remarks is that again, this is, as much as you want to have an opinion on it, great, have an opinion. Don't become tribal on it, because there is place in your lives for faith, and there's place in your life for fact. And the constant study and evolution of where you stand on those is just part of being human, and it's also part of actually challenging and growing. I said it over and over again in this. I don't like how they made it very tribal. But then again, it is a video, and it's meant to take that baseball cage and wrap that cage full of the chimpanzees that are going to go nuts. And so that's my real final thought. I hope people take this for what it was and learn from it. And I hope what we said is edifying in some way.
Yeah, I love it. You say tribal, I kind of think of black and white, the fact that it has to be one way or the other. And it rarely does. You said that there's a place for faith, there's a place for fact in everybody's life. And I completely agree. Mostly because even the things we think we know, we probably don't really know. And so there has to be room. We have to be able to keep our minds open for new information, new processing. I will share one little piece of what this other video was he says that if you took any kind of book, fiction, holy book, whatever, and you destroyed it, 1,000 years from now, it wouldn't come back the same way, because it's based on faith. It's based on people's beliefs. It's not a factually based system. But he said if you took all the scientific textbooks and got rid of them in 1,000 years, they'd come back essentially the same as they are now, because you'd follow the same process to get to the same answers. Whether or not that's actually true, it's probably not completely true. But the idea being that if you follow a repeatable pattern, you'll essentially get to the same ending every time. And that's what science tries to do. Whereas in religion, it's not repeatable. In faith, it's not necessarily repeatable. And so just recognizing what role does fact, scientific discovery, what role does that play in my life? And then what role does faith play in my life? Because if all you do is hang on to science, you're missing some important parts of both your mind and your heart, your body. You're missing important parts of what can make you a whole and complete person. And if all you have is faith, you're missing some important parts of what makes you a whole and complete and healthy person. Mm-hmm. And so I hate the idea of the whole black and white thinking, partly because that's where I was stuck for so long and didn't even know it. And that whole discovery has been difficult, but so rewarding as I've blossomed, and I've said this lots of times in our podcast as well, is that I had to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. I had to get comfortable with not knowing what everything was, or thinking that I know everything. And so I love the idea of not being in a black and white area, because it allows my brain to be expanded. It allows me to grow. It allows me to make choices and go one way or the other, and go with the information in a way that helps me to be healthier.
Yeah, I agree. Absolutely. Yeah. There's so many, there's directions you can run. I just encourage people to not make that one direction, I guess. Say.
Yeah.
If you have to plant your flag, but at times take a look at it and see if it needs to be moved a little bit.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. For those of you that are just listening today, if you have questions, you can email us at daisygirlcommunications@gmail.com. You can go to the website at daisygirlcommunications.com. If you're wanting to donate to the podcast, we love that. It helps us pay our staff a livable wage or better, which is our goal. You can do that through Venmo. And thank you so much for being here with us. We love the comments. We love having you here. Thank you, Ian, for being with me today and helping me get through this. So it's been a joy having you here. So y'all have a great one.
You guys, so good.
Yeah.
I just hope sometime we'll be able to do this in person.